Good morning.
Morning.
A few weeks ago, I sent out an email asking members of the congregation to respond to what is your favorite, or who is your favorite Old Testament character. Maybe not like the whole entire book, but maybe a specific part in a book. So I've gotten some feedback, quite a few. There's still a number that haven't responded yet. And some I know don't have emails, so feel free to tell me or text me or something, because I want to come to these sermons from time to time, building a sermon on Old Testament characters of faith, because I think they're important. And another one that was given to me was Daniel, but specifically, most people think of Daniel, they go straight to Daniel in the lion's den. This person said Daniel chapter 1. And the faith of Daniel. And so, that's what we've got today. So in Daniel chapter 1, starting in verse 1, we're going to see that in the year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand with some of the vessels of the house of God. And he brought them to the land of Shinar, to the house of his God, and placed the vessels in the treasury of his God. And the king commanded Ashpenaz, the chief eunuch, to bring some of the people of Israel, both of the royal family and of the nobility, youths without blemish, and of good appearance, and skillful in all wisdom, endowed with knowledge, understanding, learning, and competent to stand in the king's palace, and to teach them the literature and language of the Chaldeans. The king assigned them a daily portion of the food that the king ate, and of the wine that he drank. And they were to be educated for 3 years, and at the end of that time they were to stand before the king. Among those were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah of the tribe of Judah. And the chief of the eunuchs gave them names. Daniel, he shall be called Belteshazzar. Hananiah, he shall be called Shadrach. Mishael, he shall be called Meshach. And Azariah, he shall be called Abednego. But Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the king's food or with the wine that he drank. Therefore he asked the chief of the eunuchs to allow him not to defile himself. And God gave Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the chief of the eunuchs. And the chief of the eunuchs said to Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who assigned your food and your drink. For why should he see that you are in worse condition than the youths who are of your own age? So will you endanger my head with the king? Then Daniel said to the steward, whom the chief of the eunuchs had assigned over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, test your servants for 10 days. Let us be given vegetables to eat and water to drink. And let our appearance and the appearance of the youths who eat the king's food be observed by you. And deal with your servants according to what you seek. So he listened to them in this manner, and tested them for 10 days. And at the end of 10 days it was seen that they were better in appearance, and fatter in flesh, than all the youths who ate the king's food. So the steward took away their food and wine, and they were to drink, and gave them the vegetables. As for these 4 youths, God gave them learning and skill in all literature and wisdom. And Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. At the end of the time, when the king had commanded that they should be brought in, the chief of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. And the king spoke with them, and among all of them none was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore they stood before the king, and in the very manner of wisdom and understanding about which the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians, the enchanters that were in all his kingdom. And Daniel was there until the first year of King Cyrus. Now, a little bit of a lengthy read in chapter 1. And if you don't get anything else out of all this, get this. Jack, you need to eat your vegetables. You roll his eyes at me. No. One of the things that jumps out that we don't really realize when we read right over is the very beginning of this, we see that Judah is besieged by King Nebuchadnezzar. The Babylonians, the Chaldeans, have come down from the north and have captured and besieged this city. And the reason why this has happened is because Jehoiakim, they were not doing and following the things that God had set into practice. And so this was a spiritual discipline, if you will. But here's something that's interesting that we need to notice right off the bat. When we sin, it doesn't just affect us. It affects those that we love. It affects those that care about us. And in this instance, it affected the whole entire kingdom. Because people weren't following God's ways. And God had enough of it, and He sends the Chaldeans down. And they're besieged and taken away into captivity. Now, think about this, if you will. If you were 15 years old, and somebody decided to come and take over this country, and they pull you out and take you back with them, taking you away from everything you've ever known, your loved ones, all of your friends, those that you run around with and hang out with, and take you back to another country. And because you were handsome and intelligent, found with, you have all the physical attributes, you're taking in and you're going to be taught, here's how we do things here. You're going to learn about our policies. You're going to learn about our politics. You're going to learn about our language. You're going to learn about our culture. And we're going to inundate you with that. And the reason for that is to remove them completely from everything that they've ever known. That's what happens to Daniel. That's what happens to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Which is interesting, we don't really recognize their names because we always call it Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But we always refer to Daniel as Daniel, not Belteshazzar, which always fascinated me. But they're taken to be totally stripped of their culture and immersed into another culture. And this is how you're going to be for the rest of your life. Now, if you were faced with that as a teenager, what do you think your reaction would be to that? But yet, Daniel, this is exactly what Daniel faces, along with his friends. So they're selected for this training. And what they find here is that the very first thing is done to them is, you're no longer Daniel. We're not going to call you Daniel anymore. You're Belteshazzar, which means servant of Baal. Daniel means God is my judge. Belteshazzar means servant of Baal. Hananiah, you're no longer going to be referred to as the Lord is gracious, which is what his name means. You're now called Shadrach, which is inspired by the sun god. And Mishael, you're no longer, we're not going to call you that anymore, which his name actually means who is what God is. You're now called Meshach. And that means who is what the moon god is. Do you see what's happening? The very first thing they're being stripped of is their name and what their name represents in their culture. And be given another name, a name that represents something different in their culture. And Azariah, which his name means the Lord helps, he is now given Abednego, which means servant of Nebo. So this is a conquering. This is a total brainwashing, if you will, of what's happening. And so how would these young men respond? Okay, now they're taken and they're given food that is not in conjunction with the law that they've been given and grew up with. And Daniel says, I'm not going to defile myself with this food and wine. I can't. Because this goes against the statutes of God. This goes against the law of my God. I will not eat this. Give me vegetables and water. And the response to that was, if I give you this, you're going to look basically peaked and weak, gaunt. You're not going to look as healthy as the rest. And why would you put me in that situation, Belteshazzar? Because if the king finds this out and that you're doing this, he's going to take my head. And Daniel says, test it for 10 days. See what happens. And the result now is that he actually looks healthier than all the rest. Now here's something that's interesting. This is where some people get the Daniel diet. Have you heard of the Daniel diet? This is where this comes from. But if you notice in the text, Daniel asks special permission from God for this. So what am I saying? You need meat in your diet. Nobody caught that. Okay. Because I'm going somewhere with that in just a second. But he asks special permission. And God grants that. And he says, test it for 10 days. And here's the result. And God blesses him. And he blesses him not just in the physical appearance. He blesses him even more with intellect. Look at it. This is an appearance of the youth who ate the kings to be observed to you. And deal your servants according to what you see. Verse 14 says, so he listened to them in this manner. And tested them for 10 days. And their appearance was fatter in flesh than the youths who ate the king's food. So the steward took away their food and the wine, let them drink, and gave them vegetables. Now listen to this result of this. And as for the 4 youths, God gave them learning and skill in all literature and wisdom. And Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. At the end of the time when the king had commanded that they should be brought in, the chief of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. And the king spoke with them. And among all of them, none was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore they stood before the king. In other words, they stood out amongst the best of the best. This was the best of the best. And it wasn't because of anything that they've done. It was because of their obedience to God. The fate of teenagers taken away from their homeland, captive, took to another culture, to be inundated and indoctrinated in another culture, stuck to their roots, stuck to the teachings of God. And when the test comes, said, test it. Test us. And not only were they found physically fitter than the rest, but they were the best of all the people that the Chaldeans had captured. Faith of a 15-year-old. The faith of teenagers. But why does Daniel do this? Look back at verse 8. Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the king's food or with the wine that he drank. Therefore, he asked the chief of the eunuchs to allow him not to defile himself. When given the opportunity to say, I could eat this. I mean, who knows what was served? It's probably barbecue pork. Probably some good stuff. Daniel wouldn't go there. Daniel resolved in his heart not to defy God. Even though I'm captured, even though I'm a slave in a different place, taken from my homeland, all the calamity that is bestowed upon me, he could have pulled in reins and said, oh, woe is me. Why did you do this to me, God? Why did this have to happen? What? I didn't do anything wrong. Jehoiakim, he's the one who didn't follow God. Why am I being punished for something someone else does? Guess what? Sometimes that happens in life, doesn't it? Sometimes somebody does something wrong, but we also face the repercussions of it. Daniel could have done that, but he doesn't. When the first obstacle comes, He resolved in his heart not to defy God. But notice how he does this. Look at the latter part of verse 8. Therefore he asks the chief of the eunuchs to allow him not to defile himself. He doesn't demand this. He asks with politeness. And in verse 9, he did it with God's help. Because he's still continuing to seek God, even in the midst of the storm that he is in. And this storm that Daniel is in lasts for generations. For years he's in captivity before he's freed. He also did it through persistence. He did it through the willingness to test his faith. And so the value of such faith is seen in its results. If sinfulness that happens and other people get caught up in that, so to speak. In other words, if I do something wrong, it doesn't just affect me, it affects those who care about me, my loved ones. It affects the church family. Doesn't the reverse happen too? That if you follow God's will and you do the things that God says, isn't there also positive things that happen out of that benefit the family? I think so. It affected the lives of others. The value of such faith seen in its results, it affected the lives of others. God blessed Daniel and his friends even more. One simple little thing right here, where Daniel decides not to defile himself by eating something that was not commanded by God. Something very simple that he took very seriously. He decides, I'm not going to do this. I'm going to honor God and remain faithful to Him. Look how much more God blessed him because of that. He gave them knowledge and skill and wisdom. They become the best of the best, trained to serve in the presence of Nebuchadnezzar. The king found them better than all his magicians and astrologers. Daniel continued in the court of Babylon for nearly 70 years. Here's something that's interesting about that. They're in captivity, but basically Daniel's preaching God for 70 years. Who changed culture? Did Daniel let everything around him change him? Or did Daniel stick to God and preach God with his life? The faith of a 15-year-old who was taken from his homeland when he was a teenager and was in captivity for 70 years. Continued to preach God to a culture who didn't know God. That's living by faith. We sung that song this morning. Did you catch the first verse? I care not today what the morrow may bring. If shadow or sunshine or rain. The Lord I know ruleth o'er everything, and all of my worry is vain. We sing that song, but we really understand and meditate on those words and what they mean. Because it's so easy, church, to sometimes get so self-absorbed with the things that are happening to us that we forget the Lord rules over everything. And what do I have to fear? What do I have to worry? Because the book of Romans says we have been made more than conquerors. The end of the book of Ephesians says to put yourself in the might and in the strength of the Lord and to put on His armor. That's living by faith. How to succeed in keeping our commitments to the Lord. Follow Daniel's advice. Be polite. Don't be forceful, arrogant, mean, holier than thou attitude, but be polite. There is never any reason to be rude or arrogant. And impoliteness just aggravates a situation rather than it helps it. Another thing we do that we can follow in Daniel's faith is seek God's help. Without God, any effort is more than likely to fall. God seeks to help those who are loyal to Him. Also, be persistent. Don't give up trying after meeting the first obstacle. Remember what Jesus taught about persistence. Those who keep on asking, seeking, and knocking will receive, find, and have doors open to them. Matthew 7, verse 7 to 11. Remember the parable of the persistent widow that you find in Luke chapter 18? So persistent because she just kept at it and kept at it and kept at it. I used this analogy before. It's like we're a stone granite. God has a small hammer and chisel, and He's intricately working, chiseling into an image that He wants us to be. And that takes time, it takes trials, it takes failures, it takes victories. But what it takes is allowing ourselves to be continually worked on by God. And He puts us in situations to test us. He puts us in situations to stretch us and to grow us. Sometimes they're enjoyable, sometimes not so much. But the faith of a 15-year-old who is in captivity for 70 years, instead of allowing the culture to consume him, he preaches God in his life. And we're going to see that throughout Daniel. You can see that. Go back and read the book of Daniel. Also, another thing is be willing to test your faith. If not willing, how committed are you to trusting God? Yet God often invited people to test His promises. You see that in Malachi chapter 3, verse 10. And so does Jesus in John chapter 7, verses 16 through 17. And also in Matthew chapter 6, verse 31 through 34. Especially in Matthew chapter 6, because we all know Matthew chapter 6, verse 33, right? Seek first the kingdom of God, then all of these things will be added to you. But we seek the kingdom no matter where we find ourselves in life. We seek the kingdom when everything is going great, when everything is not going so great. The steadfastness and the assurance and the grounding is in the faith of God. Grounded in His Word. Rooted in the ministry. Seeking out and working with and talking with people. That's a messy job. When you have to deal, when you choose, let me rephrase that, not have to. When you choose to work with people, it's dirty and it's messy. But the one we're trying to bring them to will clean them up in a way that none of us can do. You always point people to Jesus. So some applications, school age guys. Out of the underneath of their mother's apron for the first time, they will be faced with making decisions. Will they have the faith of Daniel? You see, because sometimes we as parents want to protect our children. And we want to do things for them, and we want to make sure that they're okay. But in reality, what we should be doing is preparing them. We can only protect so much. If you protect your child without preparing them, we have set them up for failure. Because one day, they're going to launch from the house. And our children must be prepared for what they face. Because they're going to be one day moving away from the home for the first time. Leaving a spiritual environment at home, for that is the likely of the very of the world. Will they live and act with the same sort of commitment found in Daniel? Or will they find themselves 7 o'clock on a Sunday morning I think I'm going to sleep in. They're going to be challenging themselves with their reading. They're going to be challenging themselves with getting out in the community, talking with people who are lost, talking with people who don't know Jesus, sharing their faith by living it, preaching God by the simple fact of how they conduct and live their lives. Adults in the workplace attempted to accept jobs which may require one to compromise convictions. Called upon maybe to not do some things right, maybe even lie for a boss or show loyalty to a company through illegal or unethical measures. That happens in the workplace. When you're faced with those situations, will you have the faith of a 15-year-old that says, I will not defy God? Those with unbelieving spouses having to serve God and raise their children in ways of the Lord on their own, with little or no moral or religious support from their life mate. Will they have the purpose of heart that can? So what are we to do with all this? There's many applications that could be made. But what we have learned from the faith of a 15-year-old like Daniel, even those who are young need to make a personal commitment to serve the Lord. One can be steadfast in their purpose to serve the Lord without arrogance. We should look to the Lord for help and be willing to trust in His providence. God will bless and provide for those who put their trust in Him and His will. Daniel is not the only person to demonstrate such faith in his youth. We have Joseph. We have David. We have Josiah. And one that gets overlooked sometimes is Mary. That was a big deal that God asked Mary. That was huge. So another thing we need to understand is we as a culture have continued to start selling our children short. And what I mean by that is we're keeping kids longer than they need to be. They have a place and a purpose in the Lord's body today. They have a place and a purpose in our world today. They have responsibilities. They need to be taught responsibilities and wisdom and accountability. It's not always easy. But we have to remember that one day they're not going to be in the house with us. They need to be prepared for the things that life throws at them. And that preparedness needs to be rooted in the ways of the Lord. Because that is where we move and breathe and have our very being. Whatever your need is this morning, and however way that we can serve you, we ask that you come now as we stand and as we sing.